Welcome back to Spiritual Wisdom. In our last episode, we explored the life and impact of Al-Ghazali, the theologian who confronted the philosophers and championed Sufi spirituality. Today, we're diving into the response, the counterpoint to Al-Ghazali's critique. Enter Ibn Rushd, known in the West as Averroes, the philosopher who stood firm in defense of reason. Born in 1126 CE in Córdoba, in Muslim Spain, also known as Al-Andalus, Ibn Rushd was a polymath, a philosopher, physician, judge, and commentator on Aristotle. He came of age in a society where Islamic philosophy had been shaken by Al-Ghazali's incoherence of the philosophers. But Ibn Rushd wasn't ready to let rational thought be cast aside so easily. Let's start with who he was. Ibn Rushd was deeply embedded in the intellectual and political life of Córdoba. His family was filled with jurists and scholars, and he was no exception. He served as a judge, a court physician, and an advisor to the Almohad caliphs. But it was his philosophical writings, especially his commentaries on Aristotle, that earned him global recognition. Unlike Al-Ghazali, who viewed philosophy with suspicion, Ibn Rushd saw it as a vital tool for understanding the world and even for deepening one's faith. He believed that reason and revelation were not enemies but allies. In fact, he argued that a proper understanding of philosophy could actually strengthen religious belief. His most famous work? al-Tahafut, al-Tahafut, the incoherence of the incoherence. Yes, that's right. It was a direct rebuttal to Al-Ghazali's incoherence of the philosophers. In this bold and passionate defense of rationalism, Ibn Rushd systematically addressed Al-Ghazali's critiques point by point. Let's look at how Ibn Rushd tackled the three key points we mentioned last time. The Quran describes creation. Ibn Rushd suggested that philosophical reasoning could lead to a more nuanced understanding. He argued that God's Allah creation might not necessarily conflict with an eternal framework, not because the universe exists independently of Allah, but because God's Allah will and action are eternal too. Second, God's Allah knowledge. Ibn Rushd believed that God's Allah knowledge encompasses everything, universal and particular, but he emphasized that we must be careful not to anthropomorphize God. In other words, we shouldn't try to imagine God's knowledge as functioning exactly like human knowledge. Philosophy, he argued, helps us think more clearly about divine attributes without reducing them to human terms. Third, bodily resurrection. This was trickier. Ibn Rushd acknowledged the Quranic emphasis on resurrection but speculated that spiritual resurrection might. However, he was careful not to reject the core tenets of Islamic belief. Instead, he invited readers to think more deeply, to reconcile scriptural interpretation with philosophical insight. Now, what made Ibn Rushd stand out wasn't just his arguments, it was his method. He used Aristotle's logical rigor, blended it with Islamic theology, and created a unique intellectual synthesis. And while his influence in the Islamic world faced challenges, especially with the rise of anti-philosophical sentiments, in Europe, he became a superstar. Ibn Rushd's works were translated into Latin and Hebrew, and he became a central figure in the development of European philosophy. Thinkers like Thomas Aquinas, Albertus Magnus, and even later Enlightenment philosophers were influenced by Averroes' commentaries. In fact, during the Middle Ages, he was often referred to simply as the Commentator. But his rise wasn't without setbacks. In his later years, Ibn Rushd faced political opposition. His books were banned in some Islamic circles, and he was exiled, yet his legacy endured. Why? Because he represented a vision of Islam that embraced knowledge, inquiry, and intellectual courage. So what's the takeaway here? Ibn Rushd teaches us that faith and reason don't have to be in conflict. They can coexist, even enrich one another. He believed that Allah gave us minds for a reason, to seek truth, to explore the universe, and to understand our place in it. For Ibn Rushd, philosophy wasn't a threat to religion, it was its most faithful ally. Here's a reflection for you. How can we cultivate a mindset that welcomes both critical thinking and spiritual wisdom? What does it look like to hold faith and reason in balance? Thanks again for joining us on Spiritual Wisdom. In our next episode, we'll explore the life and legacy of Mulla Sadra, a philosopher from Persia who took Islamic thought in a bold new direction by blending metaphysics with mysticism. You won't want to miss it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share these conversations with fellow seekers. And as always, stay curious and stay wise. Thank you for watching.